Well, I got lots to share with you today. I'm very, very excited. I was in a hurricane. That is not an uncommon thing, but this one was pretty bad. So my family and I have some pictures, by the way. Y'all can just kind of scroll those behind me. I figured you'd like to see. We had trees down all over the place, on cars, on houses. It was wild. We were out without power from Monday 3 a.m. to Thursday 5 p.m. And there are many. I'm still getting ring notifications now that people are just now getting power back. So it's definitely been a wild ride. It was even more wild because I had basically all my family in town to celebrate my sister's baby shower and all this stuff. And so they came and heard me preach on Sunday. And then that next morning we got hit by a hurricane. They were all trapped. And I got to experience a great time with my family, more than I planned. But we learned who can handle disaster and who cannot. And we tried to make up room for everybody else. But yeah, so these are just some shots. Also, we had, we went out to kind of help, you got to lend a hand. That's part of being part of the family. So we were moving some trees. We couldn't save that guy's truck. His moonroof was busted in. But as we were moving some trees, we came across this little guy. You'll have it. Oh, not that one. That's a big guy. Jump forward to that fast one. So this is just, it's all a nightmare. Jump to that last picture of the little alligator. So we were moving a tree, and as we're moving it, we're like, oh, hey, little guy, back up. Like, it was crazy. So he's actually a baby. I don't know if it's an alligator, crocodile. I don't know, but one of those. And anyway, so we tried to move him back, and he snapped at us, but he didn't have any teeth, so we were good. But anyway, so it's been just a unique experience. And my family normally do come with me when I do these things, and they decided to just stay home and experience the house with power because it's just now a thing. So anyways, it's great. So I'm so glad to be with you. I want to talk to you about a thought that I think is really important. Y'all are in this series on Sermon on the Mount, which is a beautiful thing. And we're going to kind of jump to the end for a moment and look at kind of how Jesus brings it home. But to set this up, I thought I'd just tell you a little more about me. I love sports, and Russell does too. He was actually a great athlete. I just tried to be, but senior year for me in high school, I played football, loved playing football, and it's the beginning of the season, first game, I'm running down the field on a kickoff, and I got decleated. It means you just get hit so hard, your feet go up in the air and you land on your back, and I was fine, but up in the stands was my basketball coach, which basketball was really my sport. I just played football too for fun, and he gave me a hard time all week long about how that's why you shouldn't be playing football, that's why you should be at basketball, quit now, da-da-da-da. And so anyways, the next game 2 of the season, a similar scenario is about to happen. And I see this guy coming, he's about to hit me. Football's such a violent sport now that I realize. Anyway, so I see him coming, and I think, man, not today. This isn't happening again. So I plant my foot, and I get ready to kind of punch my shoulder into him. But as I went to plant my foot stayed, but my knee went, and I snapped my ACL, MCL, both meniscuses in one blow. And I was in a wheelchair for 6 weeks, had surgery after that, crutches forever, it felt like. And it was just a tough deal. But I tell you that because how I responded to that injury is going to really set us up for where we go. See, at that point in my life as a senior in high school, I didn't have much of a foundation of faith. I didn't have much of a foundation of anything other than sports. And so when you pulled sports out of my life because I couldn't play anymore, you basically pulled the rug out from underneath me. And so to respond to that, I decided to medicate myself with just a life of partying, and we'll just encompass all the things you can imagine in that season. And that was what I chased. That was how I tried to medicate. That was how I tried to navigate through, because I lacked the foundation that we all must have. And in fact, we know this, right? Hurricanes come, trials come. This is a surprise to us. In fact, James tells us this. He says, take joy, consider it joy when you encounter many trials. And you're like, well, that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? And you note that in that phrase, he doesn't say if you experience trials, but he says when you experience trials. And it's not trial singular, it's trials plural, right? So fill in the blank of all of the things. So for us, it was a hurricane, right? So 3 a.m. we lost power. Okay, not too big of a deal. Then we wake up the next morning, we realize tornadoes came down the street, ripped everything out of the ground. Okay, wow. Then we're living without power, but we're running on a small generator that's run by gas, which is great, right? Until the gas runs out, and then you try to go to the gas station, and well, the gas stations are now out of gas. And then you go multiple days, and you realize your family came in town. And why you did that, I don't know. And so you start to experience the trials, not one at a time, but all at once. Oh, and then your kids don't have Wi-Fi. Yeah, that's a real problem, all right? And so we're not surprised, right, by the idea that we're gonna experience trials, we're gonna experience different things, but how we respond to it is the thing. In fact, if you know that trials are coming, if you expect them, then we won't be surprised when they come. And yet, isn't it interesting that we still find ourselves, in Houston, we know hurricanes come, and yet we still find ourselves surprised by the ramifications and what I would argue is some of the unpreparation that we do. And so, when I think about all this, it leads us into the Sermon on the Mount, which is interesting because when Jesus wraps up the Sermon on the Mount, which is a beautiful thing that y'all are unpacking, I think we're gonna continue to unpack it a little longer, but as he gets to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he gives this wonderful parable to try to bring it all home. And he's gonna try to really articulate to us the significance of what he just said and what we're supposed to do with it. Now, it's important to understand the context, and I know we've talked about this before, but the Sermon on the Mount really was to accomplish two things. First, it was to show us, remember, Jesus lists a list of things for us to follow and to do and to bring into our life. And as you look at that list, you realize, wow, it's so hard to keep up. I don't know if I can keep up with this list. I don't know if I can do it, which is exactly the point. He wanted us to see that these are things we cannot do. We will never be perfect, which is why we need a Savior. And so the Sermon on the Mount in the first point was really dealing with some of the religious leaders so that they could understand that, hey, all these rules you're setting up, it's just setting up a problem. What you need is me. You need Jesus, the Savior of the world. But then the second piece, which is kind of the secondary element, is as Jesus lists all of these things for us to follow, all of these things for us to pursue, he's revealing to us a better way to live. And I know one of the key ones we talked about was anger not too long ago. Like one of the better ways to live is to mitigate anger in your life and to replace it with peace and love. And we look at yesterday what happened, and I won't go into it much, but we'll just say whatever it was that drove that anger to that action, this is what Jesus is saying. The ramifications when you don't follow my words can be destructive, and I don't want that for you. There's a better way to live. There's a better way to approach life, to approach these things. And this is what the Sermon on the Mount unpacks. But then when it's all said and done, he shares this parable, and this is what I wanted to look at together. I'm gonna read it to you. I'm gonna read the whole thing, and then we'll kind of break it down a couple pieces at a time to make sure we understand. It's Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, and it says this: "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." Okay, so there's our passage for today. Let's look at it a couple pieces at a time. And I know some of it is easy to understand, but I want to make sure we get the full context of it, because that's what brings it to life, and then we'll understand how we can walk out of here and put this into practice. So what is the point Jesus was trying to make? Verse 24, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine." What's he talking about? He's referring to the Sermon on the Mount that he had just preached. And because we won't have time to cover everything, I'm gonna put a few of these on the screen. What are some of the things he just talked about? Okay, one, he talked about forgiving others. He talked about being reconciled to others. He talked about being a peacemaker, give to the needy, love your enemies, do not commit adultery, do not murder. He says, when I look at all these things, he's like, I've listed all this for you. You've heard it, but hearing's not enough. There's a next step that I want you to follow. And what does he say? And does not do them, or does them, sorry, will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. He says, hearing it's not enough. You must then take it and put it into action. And so then maybe if you've been around the church long enough, you might feel a little hesitation there. Because you go, well, okay, I get that. We definitely want to be a quote unquote good Christian, which by the way, that doesn't exist. But isn't there a line here where it says, well, when following Jesus, it's about faith, not works. So how does this work? Because it sounds like to me, I just got listed a bunch of things that I'm supposed to do. And so let me show you this. This is a real simple form. Up on the screen here, I'm gonna put this line because this is what people think sometimes. If I do good things, if I'm obedient, if I can do the right thing, if I can put what God says into practice, then I will find God, I'll get right with God, and if I get right with God, I'll experience His grace. This is a works-based formula. If I can just do, I need to just be a good person. I need to, I need to take care of my neighbor. I need to hold the door open for old ladies. If I can do all of these things, then I'll be in, that was a joke, relax. All right, if I can do all of these things, then I'll be right. But the problem is, there will always be something else to do. You could spend your whole life working on area after area after area, and there will still be something, multiple things left. You can never do enough. This is why this system falls short. So instead, it looks like this. It's the grace of God that extends the opportunity that through Jesus Christ, we can be made right with God. And once we're right with God, the overflow of that is a life of obedience. The obedience isn't to get to God, it's because we've experienced Him and we want to follow Him. Out of the love that we have for what He's done in our life, that through the cross, He saved me, made me a new creation, 1 Corinthians tells us. I want to respond with a life of obedience. But what's even better is when you get right with Christ, it's a natural overflow. It becomes something you want to do versus something you feel like you have to do. And so I might throw out to you, if you feel like following God is something you have to do, there may be some more for you to get to unpack with your relationship with God. That as you move closer toward Him, what I think you'll find, and I can only share because this is what I've experienced in my life, I realize that, man, the more time I spend with God, there's a lot of things in my life that need to go because they just don't fit with Him. And so not because I have to, but because I want to. I want to honor Him. I want to respect Him. He saved me. I want to do these things. This is what it looks like. So for clarity, as we look at these words, it's easy to think, well, man, there's just a bunch of things I got to do. And there's a beautiful way, a better way for us to live, but that's not what saves us. It's an overflow of our relationship with God. But there's another piece of this. I think sometimes in our world, in our culture, we live in this way where everything we do, if we're honest, a lot of what we do is really in the end for us. Like, I want something out of this. And so sometimes we think, well, I'm gonna follow God, I'm gonna obey God because I'm gonna get something out of it. Now maybe you don't say that, but in our mind we think, well, I gotta do the right thing, right, so I can please God. I want God to be pleased with me. And don't get me wrong, that's a beautiful thing when we please God with our lives. But what if the results of living out God's word in our life wasn't really about us? What if it was for others? Let me give you a couple examples so you can wrap your mind around this. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said to forgive and to reconcile. When we live lives of forgiveness and reconciliation, it helps to move God's story forward. How? Well, think about it. If you try to tell people about the love and the forgiveness of Jesus, but then you don't live that out in your own life, it's confusing. say, well, I thought you followed this God that like forgives everyone and loves everyone. And you're like, well, that's true, but you're from a different political party. So it's a little different here. Like that's an exception, but everybody else, of course, if you live in my neighborhood and look like me, then I'll love you well. But if you're over here, right, that's not the truth. God says, I want you to be about forgiveness and reconciliation. What's reconciliation? I want you to restore those relationships. I want you to find that person or persons that you have tension with and resolve it. Why? Because this is what it looks like. This is what Jesus came to do. He came to unify through the saving grace. He came to bring us together. That's why all throughout the Bible we hear about unity in the church, unity amongst believers, which the idea is through the saving grace of Christ, everyone can be unified who surrender their life to Him. But when we're not about forgiveness and reconciliation, it's confusing. Or maybe we think about our giving. Jesus has multiple pieces of the Sermon on the Mount talking about how we need to meet the needs of others, to help the poor, to help the needy. God can do anything He wants. He can drop $1 million in your bank if He wants, just magically. He's probably not, so I wouldn't pray that, but He might. How does God really meet the needs of people? Typically through others. He uses us. And so what if this idea of following God's word is not about what we could receive, but rather how we could envision, how we could be a part of His story? That you see, let's say you have 3 friends and they're all struggling, and you start to pray for them. You pray for friend number 1, God, Lord, they're in a tough spot. They just got hit by a hurricane, but I'm in another city, so there's not much I can do in this moment, but I'm praying for them, Lord, would you please help them? Great. You have another friend that maybe is dealing with some sickness. Again, nothing that you can do, but you're praying for them, you're interceding on their behalf, you're praying on behalf of them to God. Wonderful thing. But then that third friend, maybe they live close by and they're sick too, but they need some help with their kiddos for one of the evenings so they could go to a doctor's visit. And God says, okay, you've been praying for all these, but this is the one that I want you to move. This is the one that I want you to step in and help. See, when we start to follow out the things of God, what we're doing is looking for the opportunities to live out the principles that He's put in front of us. And so it could look like giving to the needs, helping each other, forgiving, reconciliation. What about faithfulness in marriage? Kind of an important thing, right? Faithfulness in marriage, what does it do? It helps us to protect the family. It keeps us unified, right? Keeps the gospel moving forward, keeps our kids protected. So all of these things, it's not just about what we gain, but it opens up the door for God to move through us. We help move His story forward by how we live our lives. And then He ends this verse by saying, that wise man who hears my words and does them is like a man or a woman who built their house on a rock. He says, if you want a foundation, a solid foundation in your life, of course, Christ as your Savior is the key, and there's other pieces that have a similar narrative here. But in this moment, He says, I want you to take my words, and I want you to be doers of them. I want you to walk out for us these doors and make this a reality in you. Now, to understand the context here, when homes were built, this rock or this bedrock that the scripture is talking about, unlike today, houses that were built typically were built by the families themselves. There were builders available that you could hire, but most of the time it was expensive. It just wasn't a reality. And so typically homes were built by the families themselves. And what they would do is they had to really get into the dirt to find out what was underneath to make sure that their house would stand. Because if not, if there wasn't some form of rock, right? We're talking about a foundation of a home. If there wasn't a solid foundation, right, it might last for a little while, but if the weather came in and that sand started to shift, that house would completely be removed. And so building on the rock was a key part at this point in time. And so for us, it needs a little explanation. For them, this would have made total sense as soon as he said it. Oh my gosh, like a house built on sand versus the rock, that is completely foolish. Who would do that? And so he says, if you want to do this, here's what it looks like. Now, then he goes into all the weather. He says in verse 25, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it was founded on the rock. What is the rain? What is the floods? What is the wind? Well, you can think of the rains, could be something like unexpected situations. Right now we're adding some verbiage here to make this make sense for us, but these would be the unexpected realities. It looks like it's sunny, and then boom, here comes the rain. This could look like loss of a job. Ever been there? A breakup or a divorce, a cancer diagnosis. These are the kind of things that kind of come out of nowhere, or unexpected, and whoa, how's our foundation? Because man, we're rocking right now. Didn't see this coming. And then he says the floods came. What are the floods? Think of that as like the overwhelming circumstances that threaten to just take you out. Like you just feel like as this keeps growing, I don't know what this is gonna look like. It could be, in a very practical sense, a school or a work deadline. It could be family responsibilities or expectations that can be really overwhelming. This could be grief and loss or a growing addiction. These are the kind of things that as they grow or as they rise, they could really take you over. Or it's the winds. You could think of it like a tornado or a hurricane. And this is the picture of the things that just continually hit at us. They beat on us until we finally feel so weary, we're just ready to give up. This could be chronic illness, difficulties at work, difficulties in marriage, or possibly even a rebellious child. Jesus says, we're not surprised by this. These are the things that could come. It's not a guarantee they'll all come, but these are the things that could come. How do we stand firm? It's by taking his word and putting it in our life. Verse 26, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man or woman who built their house on the sand. See, in Palestine in that time, the Jordan River was close by. And whenever it would rain, particularly rain unexpectedly, the Jordan River would quickly rise. And as the Jordan River rose, that water would overflow and it would get to the sand. And if you weren't careful, your house could simply be washed away. And so then you might ask, okay, so they know the significance of a foundation, a solid foundation. Why would people build on the sand? Do you ever thought about that? Like, why is this even a parable worth saying? Shouldn't it be obvious that you just don't build on the sand, you only build on the bedrock? Well, maybe a couple thoughts could be. The Jordan River is right there. Maybe the view is beautiful. Anybody have a nice view from their house right now? Some of you do, I know, I drove through this area. Yeah, some of you got a nice view. Maybe the sand was scary, but the view was better, and so you took the risk. Or maybe it was just easier. Because to find out if there's bedrock, oftentimes it took some surveying of the soil and also some digging, sometimes digging pretty deep to see what's underneath. Maybe it was just easier to build on the sand than it was to do all the work to get to the bedrock to make sure it was good. So you took your chances. Well, what does that look like for us? Well, maybe coming to church is easy. Like, all I gotta do is sit in the chair and put on a little smile to make them think I like what they're saying. But then we leave and we just kind of do whatever. Isn't that easier? Or I like the view. Translation, I kind of like some of these things. Like, I know they're not all right, okay, but at least I didn't kill anyone. So maybe some of these things are okay. I like the view. Or maybe it's just hard. It's too hard to put God's principle. Like, are you kidding me? You're asking me to forgive that person that did whatever to me? Are you kidding? That you don't understand how hard that is. Maybe it's just easier to put some of the things God's asked us to do aside because, wow, this is just an easier path. See, the truth is we're not much different. Jesus knew this. And so this parable is significant because it's telling us, hey, we must be careful. We must be careful. A good sermon is great, but that's not a relationship with God. Great music is in a moment in a room together is powerful and important. I don't want you to abandon that. But it's not a relationship with God. God says, I want to be connected to you. I first want to change your life. And as you let me in, I'm going to start doing work. And then I've given you my word to be the guide so that you know where to go and how to follow. And I don't want you to think you got to do it all. But it's like, just start to walk with me and let me do the work. But it's a lot easier to show up to church. And I'm not accusing anyone, by the way, I don't know. But it's a lot easier to show up on Sunday for 1 hour, maybe a little longer because I'm here, 1 hour, and then to leave and then just live everything else the same. That's a lot easier. That may even be a better view. But this is exactly what Jesus was talking about. I don't want this for you. Verse 27, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Why was it great? Because of course, in the context of this moment, if the sand shifted, your whole house is gone. And if your whole house is gone, what that mean? Everything in it is gone as well. Great is the fall. Just for context, have you ever been homeless before? Anybody? Everybody ever gone through a bad season where you genuinely were homeless? That's a little less rare in our world, but it's definitely possible. But maybe you sold your house and then couldn't close on the next house in time, and for a short little season, you truly experience homelessness. Not as bad as the reality, but you get it, you know the feeling, you feel vulnerable. Maybe you did have a disaster come through. Maybe in Snowmageddon, you got hit. For us, it was a hurricane. We were fortunate, no damage, but there's others that absolutely lost it all. So when you experience homelessness, even in some form, you experience the vulnerability, and the parable happens to you. It's great. What does it mean for us? Well, what Jesus is saying is, listen, I don't want you to miss out. I don't want you to miss out, not on what you could gain, but the impact that you could make. When you follow my word, yes, of course, I'm gonna do great things in your life, and I'm gonna use that to bring good, but at the end of the day, I wanna use you, not the pastors on stage. I wanna use you to help move my story forward. So when you love others and forgive others and give to the needy and help the poor, when you take care of your marriages and treat your spouses right, when you love your kids the best you can, I know they're complicated. When you do all of those things, you're helping to move my story forward. But if you're just in it for you, it's possible that you're building a house on shifting sand. In fact, even more fascinating, you could build the same exact house side by side, made of the same material, same roof, same windows, same everything, but one on the sand, one on the foundation. At first glance, everything looks fine until the weather rolls in. So let me ask you, when's the last time the storm came for you? And did you shift? Were you over there and people going, man, their life is falling apart. They need help. They're a disaster. They're a mess. They're angry. Or you go, oh my gosh, yes, I'm hurt. I'm sad. I'm broke, but it's okay. I know God's got me. You could see the difference. You can have two of the same people, if you will, come to this great church and walk out and live two completely different lives. It looks the same on the surface, but the foundation comes to life. In fact, this is interesting. This really happened in a sense. This really happened. A couple years ago, there was a couple, Pam and Warren, and they got hit by a hurricane. They lived closer to the shore, hit by a hurricane, and their house was completely destroyed. They said, you know what? We're not doing this again. We are not going through this again. We want to build a house on a foundation that'll actually last. I don't think they were thinking biblically at the moment. I think they were just thinking practically. And so they said, we're making the investment. They spent about $100,000 extra to build their house on a foundation that might have the chance to stand. Now, of course, their hope was, right, we're praying for the best. No rain, no hurricanes, no problem. But if it happens, we want to be ready. Look at this picture. This is what happened. There's one more, a little wider angle. Look at that. Real story. This is from Hurricane Ike. Can you believe it? And what do you think everybody's asking afterwards? What'd you do? Like, what did you do that thing is still standing? That's incredible. And I'll tell you what they did. They put in the work, the time, and the investment. What does it look like when you're at work and people are going, hey, you've gone through a lot and it seems like you should be really just destroyed right now, and yet there's some weird sense of not necessarily happiness, but there's some peace that you have that I don't understand. This is a picture of what it looks like to have the foundation. It's a real thing, and Jesus knew this. He wanted us to understand it. So what's it gonna take? It takes work. It's gonna be hard. Right? To take God's principles and to live them out, it's hard. It's hard. It takes investment, right? It took money for them. That's not necessarily our deal here, but it's gonna take some investment. But oh, is it worth it? My son, Kason, he's 6 years old, and he is developing his life of, sports and all that stuff. And so we've recently found pickleball. Any pickleball fans in the house? None. Awesome. Well, all right, thank you, one back there. Okay, so he's 6 years old. And so he's like, Dad, I want to play pickleball. I really want to do this. It's going to be great. I said, okay. Now, I've already been playing, so I know a few things about it. I said, okay, well then here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get you ready. And so to get him ready, I bought him this. This is a little, it's called a Dink Master. It's a little wall. And he could just stand there at the line and just keep hitting, and use it to practice and to develop. Now here's the thing. All he wants to do is get out of that garage. He wants to go play with people, he says. When are we gonna play with people? And I'm like, son, I know, but listen, before you can go play with people, you've gotta put in the work to be ready. See, I know what he doesn't know, and that is that pickleball's won by drilling, not by playing recreational with people. And so he's been doing this for a couple weeks, and finally, it's been about three or 4 weeks ago, I took him out on a Sunday night to play with some adults. And he held his own. I'm not gonna say he won, but he held his own. Why? Because he hadn't played in an actual setting before, but he got out there and immediately they're like, who is this 6-year-old that's hitting the ball back to us? Why? Because he put the work in the private places. And the same is true for us, right? It's hard to follow God, but it's not impossible. It's hard to do the right thing, but it's worth it. It's an investment, but God uses us to move his story forward. And it's such a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful thing. So I told you my knee story at the beginning. Well, after that was over, I was a senior in high school. About 7 years later, I was still playing sports because I may be what you call an addict to sports and fitness and physical fitness. And I'm playing basketball at our old church, old Second Baptist Woodway. And I'm running down the court on a fast break, and I go up to make a layup, and I plant my feet. This time, my knee didn't go sideways, it went in. And I hyperextended it. I tore my ACL, my patellar, and both meniscuses. Now, if you know anything about knee science, the patellar and the ACL run different directions. So my doctor thought it would be awesome to write a scientific article on how these two actually tore once by this guy, Chad Harold, back many years ago. And so anyways, I was in a little medical journal, which was awesome, but it wasn't awesome because I was in total disaster, all right? See, the difference this time, by the way, I'm in full-time ministry at this point. I've been a pastor for a couple years. And what happened though is because those ligaments went opposite ways, we went in, repaired the ACL, went through the whole year of rehab. Then we had to go back in to do the patellar and do another year of rehab. Right? I thought basketball was safer. I was completely wrong. But I tell you that and really just kind of bring it home because the post of the moment was radically different. See, the first time, I didn't have a foundation. It wasn't set on God or his principles or his word. It was just me doing what I wanted to do. But the second one, don't get me wrong, it wasn't that it was easy. And it wasn't that I didn't have moments. I had to move back with my mom. I was out on my own, but I was in an apartment on the 3rd floor and I couldn't make it up the stairs anymore. So I had to move back in with my mom. I had to take time off from work and it was just totally humbled, right? Because the mom's taking care of me, which was kind of nice now that I think about it as I get older. But anyways, so I'm not gonna pretend like it wasn't hard. Like I wasn't sitting there with my knees snapped in half going, this is what James was talking about. Count it joy, it's amazing. Like it wasn't like that. But the difference is what followed. See, in that season, I knew who I was. I knew where my faith was, and I knew who God was. And so though it was painful and it was a journey, I didn't abandon everything or chase all the other things or try to medicate myself with all of the worldly stuff. Instead, I just leaned into him and what I discovered. I don't know if this is the reason why he allowed my knee to snap in half. I'd love to talk to you later about why we went that path. But what I did learn in that moment, I was talking to God just now. What I did learn in that moment was I, as a young pastor, was on a path of dangerous burnout only a few years into ministry. And that moment, I think God used to pull me back and to say, hey, buddy, if you're gonna keep going, we've gotta learn how to pace yourself because you were headed for a disaster. And so God used that moment to do something significant. By the way, he used the first one, it just took a few years, to get me into faith, to get me into ministry. Because I was getting ready to chase sports as a guy that wasn't very athletic, and I was gonna try to take it all the way to the end, even if I sat on the bench. But because I couldn't, I had to follow a new path. I had to go a new direction, and over that journey, it led me into the church and ultimately led me to the vocation of pastoral ministry. And so God took both moments. The difference is the response. Because the first one, there was no foundation, but the second one there was. Was it hard? Absolutely. Was it difficult? You bet. But it was still worth it because I'd been putting in an investment in my life of trusting God's word, applying it to my life, realizing in that moment as my knee snapped, I said, hey, this isn't the end of the world. It's okay. There is still something here, and I'm thinking God's gonna be able to use it, and he did. And so what I want you to hear, because hopefully today you're not going through some difficult thing, some tough thing, but what I want you to hear that if you are a Christ follower, Jesus' words are as true for you as they were for those listening that day. We don't want to just be hearers of his word. We want to be doers. We want to put it into practice so that he can use us. He can mold us and shape us, but then he can use us to move his story forward. So if you come here and you listen, but you don't walk out of here feeling beat up. Just be encouraged. What a great day to say, Lord, I can't fix it all, but I'll try to fix one thing. Lord, show me what part of my life might need some exploration. What part of my life could use some adjustments? And if you don't know where to start, this is why we read the Bible, right? How do we know what to do? How do we know what God says? By reading his word. And by coming in here and paying attention and then going, okay, great message, Russell. Now, how do I live that out? I want to close just by reading to you this same passage one last time, but I want to do it in the message format. I'll give you a little Bible study help. I think it's really helpful to use the message toward the end of a study to just go, okay, I just want to see it in a fresh, more modern text. The message is written to give us a more modern vernacular, to just be able to better process it. I do want to warn you though, there's a cuss word in it. If you grew up in a conservative home, some of you just freaked out. If you grew up in a conservative home, you probably weren't allowed to say stupid, and stupid's in here. So I just give you a warning in case you have a jarring reaction, PTSD from being a kid. This is what the Message Bible says on this same passage. I think it'll be helpful, and we'll pray. These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words, words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you are like a smart carpenter who has built his house on solid rock. Rain poured down, the river flooded, a tornado hit, but nothing moved that house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you are like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. So let's take God's word and let's put it into our life and watch him do something incredible.
We hope the message you just watched encourages your faith and helps you to follow Jesus more closely. And if you've never given your life to Jesus, we want to share with you how you can do that. If you text the word DECIDE to the number that's going to be on your screen, someone from our team is going to follow up with you and help answer any questions you might have about following Jesus. Also want you to know, thank you so much for your support of our church, both for our church family and our extended family. The only way we can bring messages like the one you just watched is through your generosity. If you would like to support the work that God is doing through our ministry, you can go to sunsetcanyonchurch.org and click on the button that says Give. We hope you have a great week, and we pray that God continues to work in your life in the days to come.